Do you want to know the best way to apply your cologne? Or maybe you're just looking for a few extra pointers or tips on how to do it. I'm James from J-ROYL, and these are the best ways to put on your fragrance. Step one is to practice good hygiene. You don't want to smell like an idiot before you put on your cologne. The best cologne won't replace bad hygiene. Now that you've showered, you not only got rid of all the dirt and grime from the previous day, but your pores are open, they're ready to absorb the fragrance and allow it to perform better. Now, if you're really prone to having dry skin, you can experiment with applying moisturizer shortly after you've showered. Skin that is more moisturized, either naturally or with the cream, will just work with fragrances a little bit better. It's like if you spray some water on a cracked desert floor, it'll just sink right into the earth. The same thing will happen with the fragrance. It'll sink in and essentially disappear. From my personal experience, I've never felt the need to use a moisturizer or a fragrance base. The fragrance alone on my clean body has always been enough. Before you apply your fragrance, you should really get to know your fragrance. All fragrances are different. They project differently, they last a different amount of time, and also the atomizers themselves are different. Only after you've worn a fragrance a handful of times will you really be comfortable with how to apply it. How strong it is, how weak it is. 5 sprays of this is a lot different than 5 sprays of this. Also, before you put anything on your body, figure out where you're going that day, what you're doing, your activity level, the temperature outside, whether you're going to be indoors or outdoors. All of these factors play a huge role in how you apply your fragrance. Typically speaking, you're going to apply more if you're outdoors. When you're indoors, a fragrance will be a lot more noticeable because you'll be in a climate-controlled environment around a lot of people probably, and if you smell too strong, your fragrance will become a burden rather than an awesome accessory. When I'm outside, I go about 20 to 30% heavier with my fragrances, which means I apply a bit more. But keep in mind, if you're outside, there's a good chance you'll be inside at some point during the day. So you're ready to put something on your body. When I'm putting on cologne, I use the LAD technique. Location of sprays, amount of sprays, and distance of the sprayer. Let's start with location. Where do you spray cologne on your body? You might have heard the term pulse points, a part on your body that actually has a pulse. And usually it's a place that is a lot hotter and has a higher heat level than anywhere else on your body. So the most relevant pulse points when it comes to fragrances are located here, 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 and here. And that's why you'll often find people applying cologne on their neck, behind their head, on their wrists, and then they do that. The pulse points that I most commonly use are in a cross pattern on my neck. If a fragrance is really strong, I'll just spray once on the back of my neck. If it's not quite as strong, maybe I'll do 2 sprays, back of the neck and then front. If I need a little more performance, then I go behind the ear on both sides. For a lot of fragrances, 1, 2, 3, 4 will suffice. But if the sprayer on my fragrance doesn't really put out a ton of fragrance, I may double tap and do 2 sprays, which kind of makes it into one full big spray. You can apply your fragrance to your elbow pits. The inside of my elbow is a great place because if you talk with your hands, you're gonna be wafting your fragrance around and it'll help with your scent bubble that you're trying to create. Wrist is also a very common and fantastic place, but just keep in mind if you have bracelets and watches, it may affect the performance of the fragrance. It may rub it off a little bit, so just something to keep in mind. And if you're wearing shorts, you can apply fragrance right here. The last thing I'll say about pulse points is they're not the only place that you should apply fragrances. Because pulse points are hot and they'll produce a lot more heat, they're great for projection, but because of that elevated heat level, it accelerates the process, which means the fragrance may not necessarily last quite as long. So you can also experiment spraying areas that aren't pulse points. The forearm is one of my favorite areas. It's in between 2 pulse points, and it's also not gonna be affected by watches or t-shirts. It'll be exposed and no one's gonna be rubbing your fragrance off of you. Now next is the amount of sprays. This one varies quite a bit, and you'll often hear a lot of people online say, oh yeah, just go 5 sprays, just go 4 sprays. Problem is, fragrances perform very differently, not only in the strength level of the liquid, but also the distribution of the atomizer. A cheap Armand fragrance might look like this, while a Creed fragrance might look like that. Big difference. The amount of times you spray a fragrance on you will likely determine if you smell too strong or you can't be smelt at all. So this is probably the more important of the 3 steps. For my personal use case, on average, In the summer, I'll apply a fragrance 4 to 8 sprays on myself. In the winter, 1 to 3 sprays. And that is largely to do with the fact that fresh fragrances are lighter. Fragrances for the cold tend to be a lot stronger, so you won't need to use as much. The last part is the distance of the sprayer itself. Now this seems like it could be a bit insignificant, but it plays a huge role in how your fragrance performs on you. Your fragrance gets released in a cone formation. The closer the fragrance is, the more concentrated and small the area will be. As you bring the sprayer further out, that area will get larger. If it's too close, you'll just have a really strong smelling spot on your neck. But if it's too far away, you'll have a very general mist that will essentially be pointless and undetectable. Do a test spray and see how the fragrance comes out. If the cone that's coming out seems to be a bit shallow, you can pull back a little bit more. If it's extremely wide and vast, you might want to get a bit closer. And finally, should you spray your clothing? A lot of people ask, is it a good idea to spray your clothes? If you are using a fresher fragrance that doesn't necessarily develop a whole lot, it's kind of just a basic citrus fragrance or an aquatic fragrance, one of your gym freshies, then I would encourage you to spray your clothes. Your clothes do a great job at absorbing a fragrance and keeping it there, helping with your longevity by a couple of hours in a lot of cases. So that sounds great. Why not spray your clothes every time? Well, here's the problem. When a fragrance is sitting on your clothes, it's not getting a chance to incorporate into your own skin chemistry and mingle with your own bodily oils, which is what makes fragrances smell different on different people. So if you have a fragrance that is meant to develop, meant to evolve and change throughout its lifespan, you want to keep that fragrance on your skin as much as possible so it can develop and do its nice magical thing. You also have to be aware of the strength of the fragrance. If you're putting a really heavy wintry fragrance on your clothes, it's probably gonna stay on there for a couple days, sometimes weeks in my case. I have scarves that I wore last winter that still kind of smell like Tuscan leather. And the last thing worth mentioning too, the fragrances with higher oil concentrations, they may stain some of your clothes, and it's probably not the best thing for certain fabrics. So if it's a nice outfit that you're wearing, be careful about that. If you're looking for some tips on where to buy some fragrances, you can check this video out here. This is actually not my opinion. These are some of the rules, the royal rules on fragrances, so you should probably follow them. Probably.